Okay.
Can I switch you spots?
What? Yeah. Okay, Cheech is going to get set up. We've got 3 hours of material followed by a quiz.
Professor Curtis.
Roasted. So what I shall do.
Can we do that as a take-home test?
Yeah.
Uh,
Gayhard, open book.
yeah.
What would they say in engineering school?
They'd say, think outside the box.
Well, we're thinking inside the box tonight. Not really.
Okay, so if the YouTube people can hear us, I don't know. They should be able to because it looks like it's streaming healthfully. We just can't monitor except for Brandon, so
On the YouTubes?
on the YouTubes. But it's going. Then we'll push our little magic button and switch over the device here in a second. So we're just going to go through a few slides of information, and Lance wishes he could be here. Well, he kind of does actually, but he has some family stuff. But anyway, we all three put this together, and as it says up there, we're talking about tailwater strategies. So this is not going to fish strawberry.
Explain what a tailwater is.
Finn, is that your name?
Yeah,
What is a tailwater?
it's where there's dams and a lake, but a freestone river is where there's nothing blocking.
You win. You win tonight. So
In
Finn wins for the night. Everybody give him.
I didn't know that till I was 23. But I'm on that vernal education, so
Yeah, it's pretty
Strong
sketchy
word.
out there.
I've known that for about 30 seconds.
yeah. Well,
there you go.
you're from Riverton, so
Watch out for the
you live there now.
I'm smoking from a Harrimanite.
Oh boy.
He's my neighbor.
So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you would or wouldn't fish in the winter. I hate fishing in the winter because it's so cold. No, I don't. I fish in the winter. But why would you want to? Well, number one, whether you're going to the Green or the Prover or the Weaver, it's always going to be less crowded, with very few exceptions. And the worse the weather, the more solitude you will have. And this isn't always true, but in a lot of times you'll see less, or you'll have a relatively warmer water output from the dam than you would at other times of the year. So that can be an advantage. It shows how tough you are. Probably my favorite thing about fishing in the winter is midge hatches. And midge hatches go all year round, doesn't matter really, they're going all the time. But in the winter is when the fish will really key on them. And like one of our favorite things to do is we go to the Green in February, March, January even, and you can catch fish on dry flies like nobody's business.
Oh, whoops.
Don't break the computer. And then worst case, if you don't know how to tie flies, then go fish in the winter. It's something to do. And you could ice fish too if you want, but we're talking about fly fishing. So just really quickly on gear, there's nothing magical about the different gear you may want to use. Generally, if you're fishing midges, especially dry fly rigs, you may want to go with a softer rod to protect your light tippets if you're going to use those.
Can I talk about that for a sec? Because you're fast Rod McGee over here.
Yeah, that's true.
No, but rods, that's one thing I gave some thought to. Like, you can actually fish a faster rod as long as you're light on the hook set. As you see, we're going to tie some flies that are tied on really, really small hooks. So when you see that fish rise, or if you get a strike, you don't have to set the hook like we do when we're fishing strawberry, right? It's just a nice lift and create tension on that. And so that's really important. But if you have kind of a softer rod, I've got 2 4-weights that are kind of my favorites right now. An Orvis H3, which is pretty nice. And then the old Scott G2, or from their G series line. It's like a 9-foot 4-weight, and it's a moderate rod. It lays out a line really well. So if you've got a rod like that, that's a great winter setup. Sorry, I'm gonna hijack.
Keep going. All right.
No,
Reels just get kind of don't freeze when you drop them in the water.
that's a good point. Don't get your reel wet.
Yeah, there's nothing special about reels. But bear in mind, cast reels are more brittle, and metal is more brittle in the cold. So if you do want to save money and get a cast reel, you have a much higher chance of breaking that in the winter in cold temperatures than you would if you smashed it on a rock in the summer. Just metallurgic 101. Leader and tippet, you're not going to deviate a ton from what you might fish other times of year. It depends on what you're doing. For nymphing, I mean, I'm not really changing up my leader and tippet much. On dry flies, I probably will, especially if you're fishing smaller flies, and we'll talk about smaller flies. But at that point, it becomes a matter of matching your tippet to the fly size, so that your tippet's not acting as a steel cable to your fly. You still want the fly to have natural movement. So you're not going down to 6 or 7x because the fish can see it. It's because you want your fly to have a little bit more natural movement, and you want it to turn over a little bit more and have more delicate presentation on the surface.
I'm gonna tie a fly. We're gonna tie a size 30 midge just to show you that you can do a proportionate 30. But you can put 6x through it. So 7, 8x. I can't remember if I've ever fished 7x or smaller. 6x will go through it. 6x will land you plenty of fish, especially if you have a soft rod, you have a light hook set, you're not horsing them in. All that goes into whether you can land fish on lighter tippet.
And I haven't fished 7x in years, so you don't have to.
2 years to be exact.
Two, maybe 2.5. So you just kind of size your tippet to what you would normally want to do. Gloves, that's just a question we get a lot. If you don't need gloves, don't wear them. If you do, the fingerless gloves are kind of your best case scenario because you need your fingers to do things without getting flies stuck in them.
There's a hybrid glove too that is a mitten mixed with the fingerless that fold over. Just make sure that they have some snap or Velcro back there, because that can be a pain.
And then no ski gloves. Those are the worst.
Right.
Obviously. Layering, and this is one of the things that probably the biggest complaint we get when it comes to winter fishing is feet. Big contributing factor to feet getting cold is that you have too much sock on. So like 2 pairs of sock, and your boots are tight on your feet. Your feet are going to get colder in wading boots than if you had a smaller layer and your feet had more movement and circulation. So
most companies will make a sock designed for heavy winter fishing.
It's like usually wool kind of base.
Yeah, so just 1 pair for sure.
What I do, if it's really cold, is I use very, very thin, they're some sort of dress sock, basically, very thin.
His are usually white.
They're white. I do have. They were the cheapest, so they're white, and then a wool sock over the top of those. So the base layer is not much at all. And then with anything you're doing, it's always good to layer up, not just wear your big parka or big coat. So you're going to be better off. Plus, you never know, around here in January, you could have a 55-degree day and it's sunny and you're fishing the midge hatch, and if you had just one big coat, you're either too hot or too cold. So
There's a lot of really good gear out there too. Like you can get a really thin base layer. And then if you put 2 layers on top of that, usually you're good. If it's anywhere above say 35 degrees outside and you go out with that setup, you're good. You know, put a few hand warmers in your pocket. And the best way to warm up hands, in my opinion, is just to take a break, get your hands a little bit warm, move them around, as opposed to just trying to keep them covered up, you know, so you fish through frozen hands.
More of a pain than anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and everybody's got different budgets for different gear. When it comes to cold weather layering, you can find a lot of that, you know, capelline or different types of layering products online. We've got a few that we carry here that's not something that we sell a lot of, so we don't really have a dog in the fight. Okay, so Cheech has a special way of removing ice with an ice pick.
Yeah. So, ice in your rod, in your guides, is inevitable. It's going to happen, right? And so there are pastes, and people say if you put antifreeze on your guides, it'll help, but it really doesn't. Regardless of what you do, if you think about it, there's water on your fly line, and you're casting, that fly line's going through your guides, and it's picking up water. So your guides are going to freeze up. The other thing, like for example, this little guy right here, it's an 8.5 foot or 8 foot 8 inch 4-weight, nice and wiggly. The tip of this is very, very fine. So if I get ice and I'm picking it off with my fingers, it's good down here. But once I get up to here, I'm going to try to keep my reel out of the water, and I'm going to be putting a lot of force up here, and you'll break your rod that way. So don't do it, okay? So let's imagine I'm standing in thigh deep water. For Curtis, it would be chest deep. For Finn, it would only be to his knees, right? So I'm in water about this deep. And let's say I've got ice all through my guides. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the whole rod in the water minus the reel, okay? Just let it sit in the water, and you'll see the ice dissipate, and it will come out of your guides, because fancy science tells me that the water's not as cold as the ice is, so it'll melt it. So as your rod's in the water, just kind of give it a little shake like that, and then when you pick it up, give it another little shake, all the ice is gone, okay? It takes like 15 seconds. And then shake off the water as best you can, go ahead and fish, and then you'll be good for another 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on how cold it is. Whatever you do though, don't get your reel in the water. Because if your reel freezes up, you're basically gonna get as much line as you need out to fish, and you're just gonna leave that sucker alone for the rest of the day, because it'll be frozen. So anyway, that's my anti-ice hack.
And it's a good one. Checking that. So our number 2, Lance didn't want this one in there. We did put number 2, fish flank line.
It's at 30 miles an hour.
30 miles an hour.
He moves.
He moves and covers water when he has to.
He's hardcore too. Like, we fished a day on the boulders. It was October. We were all just dying, right? And we all went back to shore, trying to warm up, and Lance powered through for like another 2 hours. It was insane. But I think the other thing is he's always prepared. So regardless of when you go fishing or where you go, make sure that you're always bringing a few layers with you, because you never know what the weather's going to do. Because that was an October day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a shop trip where Big B demoed the Nimbus 2000 float tube. If you haven't watched that video, it's a good one. Anyway.
A couple other things real quickly. Probably the biggest thing you'll realize is the fish really slow down in the winter. Their metabolism slows. They still have to eat because they need energy to not go downstream. So the fish will eat, but they slow down. They will, the one further on the list, they're going to be in different spots maybe than the summer. So not necessarily deeper, but slower water. So think of where they may have to expend less energy. because they don't have as much energy. It's not as much food. So, but they still need to live, they still need to eat, so they'll be in spots where it requires less energy. So,
Keep in mind that
very
might
shallow.
be underneath a big current too.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of current, and there might be a soft spot underneath that current that's like a depression under a rock or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And then probably one of our favorite things to do for winter fishing is fishing dry flies. And pros got a lot of good dry fly action on most any section. You can find fish rising. Not every day, not all day. So you have to time where the hatch is going to be strongest. In the winter, that's usually the warmest part of the day or in that neighborhood. And then the one above that, or below that, there's going to be smaller flies often. So midges. But again, sometimes they could be on a streamer bite. They're not going to be as aggressive, but you do have to prepare for small stuff if you want to catch good numbers often. But that's not always true. Sometimes we'll fish bigger patterns and during a midge hatch when size 30s would be working, and sometimes they'll hit a bigger fly just because.
On the Green River, there are times, or lots of times, and it happens on the Provo too, but they might be really small midgets, like 28s and 30s that are actually hatching. But then they clump together. They get in these cluster balls, and that's what a griffith's gnat is. So if you have a really prolific hatch and you've got bigger clusters of midges, you can fish like a size 10 griffith's net in the middle of the winter, and the fish just kill it. Because if you think about it, they're expending energy to go up and eat. If they can get 50 midges in one bite versus one size 30, what do you think they're going to go for? So it's worth it to just kind of gauge that. If I ever change to a bigger griffith's gnat or a bigger cluster midge, I always change my tippet out too. It's a good way to break off. If you have your smaller tippet tied around a bigger hook, it's a bigger chunk of metal to wrap it around, and it's just the knot just doesn't cinch down as well. So I'll change it up to like 4X. So practice knots, like changing your tippet out to match the size and to get a good drift and things like that is pretty critical. Easy too.
Easy. Something you can practice at work. And then we mentioned dressing for the weather. Yeah, I think the Green River, even the Provo's probably underfished when it comes to wintertime. There's people, I think, assume it's cold and this fishing's not going to be as good. But for me, I've had probably out of my top 5 days on the Green, I'd say maybe 2 of those days have been midge days in January or February.
Moving like 25 yards up the shore.
Yeah. And just catching fish after fish after fish. So, and it's a hoot. Middle of January, catching a bunch of fish on dry flies. So there's a lot to be said about that. Okay, we're going to talk about a bunch of different patterns. I mean, this is not at all an exhaustive list. This is just a few we put up, and then Cheech is going to get on and tie a bunch of big old streamers here. But my personal favorite is the foam merger.
Which I brought stuff to tie.
Whoa!
I actually had to get it out of storage in the bin that says crap flies.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot argue with the effectiveness of that fly. So just some background on that fly. When I was in college a couple of years ago, I would go and fish the Green almost every weekend. And my buddy and I, he had a gas card from his dad, and it was related to their farm, and he just let us use it. And so we'd go all over the place. So we got hooked on the Green, and we were just going out there every weekend. And that was probably starting in January, and we were nymphing and catching fish and doing, it was great. But we got to the point where we're coming up onto some spots that had these scum suckers and just in general fish coming up for midges. And try as we could not hook into many fish. 2 hours at a hatch with one fish. And there was one time I was fishing a hole, and this dude comes up, first cast, nails the fish. And I'd been there for 3 hours, and I'd gotten like 1 or 2 fish.
Was his name Cheech?
No.
Oh.
You would have been a baby. No,
Yeah.
I was joking. But he was from Bourbon, so.
Yeah, there you go. Basically same thing.
So he, and I was already getting ready to leave, and I was like, all right, this is it. I get around kind of the part of the back eddy where he was, and he'd already released and caught another one. So he was 2 for 2, and I was like, this is garbage. So he struck up a conversation. I was too embarrassed, and come to find out he's using, it was something like a palomino midge. It was a little bigger. And so I go back home, and I started kind of tinkering with that style of pattern. I go down to the Provo, start looking at naturals, and realizing that the palomino midge doesn't even come close to what the naturals looked like. But I thought, and then I started kind of watching the bugs and noticed that the midges were hatching with a more of a vertical orientation, and then they get stuck in the film. And did some reading and ended up coming up with this foam merger, which is basically a chunk of foam and then some easy magic dub coming off the back. And the first version I had dubbing, a little tough for an indicator thing. Right now the way I tie them is just easy magic dub and foam, nothing else. The ones we get from Fulling Mill have little gills on them, they're a little bigger, but that's it. But that fly, when I went back a couple weeks later, same hole, same kind of conditions, and I literally went up the bank probably 50 yards for the whole 3 hours, and I just lost track of the number of fish I caught. It was literally one after another. If there was a fish rising, I would cast to it and I would catch it. So anyway, there's
What size foam mergers?
those were probably 22s, 24s. I'll fish bigger ones now because I'm not as stuck on the fact that they have to be small flies. And every once in a while it can vary. So I usually have like size 24s on up to 16s in the foam merger. And I fish them on lakes. I fish them all over. So anyway, I'm not going to go into a big story on all of this. We've got Griffith's gnat, which is kind of a standby. Cheech's bunny midge, probably my go-to dry fly midge. Zebra midge, everybody's heard of. Orange Asher also has kind of a similar weird history. It happened on the green. And it's ridiculously effective, even in a size 16 or 14 on the green. So my go-to setup on the green is an Orange Asher with the foam merger behind it. That's pretty much all you need. Yawn Special, I assume everybody's heard of the Yawn Special. It's getting a little older now.
Do we have videos on all of these? Yeah,
Most
except
of
for
them,
the
yeah.
squirmy.
Yeah,
That's
That
coming
one's
out. Is that tomorrow?
Yeah.
Or the next day?
tomorrow or the next day, yeah. We have a really good video on the squirmy, different style. Indestructible.
Yeah.
Indestructible.
It'll last 5 minutes more than that. And then eggs, squirmy wormies, fish eat, bloodworms, fish eat, annelids. It's not like you're dunking a worm. And the same with eggs. I mean, it's stuff in the water, you're imitating stuff that they're eating. If you feel bad about imitating an egg that they eat, then don't fish an egg. But eggs can be really effective all different times of the year. As long as you're not trudging through the spawning areas and picking up eggs and doing stuff like that. You're good with it. Okay. Questions on anything midge related or winter related? Otherwise, this is just going to be fly tying instruction here on out and witty banter.
And witty banter. Yeah, one of the things that I'll say is when I'm headed to the river in the winter, I'm kind of going with the hopes of fishing dry flies. Okay? Because if you look hard enough, you'll find noses up. You'll find fish eating dries. And it's a ton of fun. So typically I'm fishing a 4-weight, and a lot of times we'll take like a Euro rig or something you can throw streamers with. But when it's wintertime, I'm taking a lighter 4-weight. I'm taking longer leaders, tapered down to 6X, and I'm going to try to find fish that are rising. One of the things that I found out this summer was I took one of the trout hunter leaders with me.
And there's something that they do to their nylon leaders that make them like almost have no memory. They lay out, and they make them in 10-foot lengths as well. But those things, coupled with, you know, whatever tippet you want to put on, is really, really deadly. The other thing, a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't fish fluorocarbon with dry flies. Anybody heard that before? Yeah? Why do they say that?
It's supposed to sink. Not float is good.
Yeah,
Well, also, it is probably better underwater because it has the same refractive index as water.
yeah. So there are all kinds of reasons. The one I hear is that it sinks. But if you think about it, I'm casting, and I'm going to cast. With me, it's like 120 feet, you know. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm fishing maybe 40 feet in front of me, and I put a delicate cast, you know, I pile cast, or I'll throw a curve or something like that, and I get my fly. How long's that drift going to last? Not very long, right? 10 seconds, 15 seconds, depending on how fast the water is. So that fluorocarbon is not going to have enough distance to really sink, okay? It might sink if you let it float all the way down the river. It's gradually going to go down. But a 10-second drift that's 30 or 40 feet, you're not going to know the difference between fluoro and well, I guess they're both monofilament, so fluoro versus nylon. Okay, so I fish fluorocarbon a lot, and one of the things with midges also is if you have picky fish, if that tippet is actually sitting right down in the film as opposed to right on top of it, it's going to blend in better with the water. So anyway, don't be afraid of fishing fluorocarbon. The other thing is, if you start fishing or you see fish rising and you're not catching any fish, or you're struggling, focus on the micro drag in your current. Okay, so if you're casting out and you're putting your fly right over them, make sure that your fly is 100% drag free. The other thing to think about is, what are the rise forms like? Are you seeing the back of the fish, or are you seeing their mouth? Okay, what do you think's happening if you see their back? They're eating emergers. So the flies that they're eating are about that far under the surface. Okay, so anyone have a good technique to use for that?
Yeah, fish super heavy tippet,
Yeah, heavy
so
tip.
it doesn't drop.
Yeah,
So you can get 3 feet from your drag fly,
yeah.
and you fish like 3x.
Oh, really?
Then you're not gonna hinge straight under,
Uh-huh.
so that it'll lay flatter.
Yeah, you can do that.
And then you use a little lighter fly, so it's not super heavy.
Mm-hmm. Like for nymphing, is that what you're saying, or?
No, I'm just saying, take a dry fly, if
Yeah.
it's a super picky fish, right?
Yeah,
And then put like 2 to 3 feet, quite a good distance, use heavy tippet and a lighter fly.
yeah.
So like a brass bead versus a tungsten bead
So
or
it won't
something
cut
like
through
that.
the water as fast?
So that it's not gonna hinge on
Yeah.
your drift, yeah, so that it will drop, but it'll just slightly drop.
Yeah. So what did I do? Nothing? There are all kinds of tricks like that, but that's what you're gonna think about, is try to find something to make it so that your fly doesn't sink it quite as fast.
Just one addendum to that is you do have to worry about, if you are fishing midges, a midge is gonna ride vertical.
Yeah.
Right, and it generally rides on a slight arc. So if you do have a slight drag, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you have that 3 feet, it gives it a little more space for that. But what's gonna happen with that horizontal is you're not gonna get the vertical presentation as much. So that is,
Right.
can be a concern.
Sure.
Where if you've got a swimming mayfly that's gonna swim horizontal, it's a really, really effective way to fish it
Sure.
during
Yeah.
the growing hatch or something like that.
Yeah, and you will see bluings in the fall, and then they don't really start to get prolific until later in the spring. But yeah, those are good points. You can also put mud on your leader. There are certain types of things to make your leader cut through the water, or fish a dry fly with an unweighted dropper. You know, I'm talking like it's going to be like that far under the surface.
Just go foam merger young special to catch one.
Boom.
Foam merger young special. But what if you want to feel good about yourself after you fish?
Put a third one on there to do an 8.
We used to sell a fly called the Not So Special.
Oh, yeah?
That was the same thing with
Yeah.
different thread.
I've heard
It
a
made some
few
people feel
different
better.
names for that fly, but yeah. So think about that. I mean, look at the rise forms. If you're seeing backs or tails, it means that they're not going to eat your fly around on the surface. You might get a few that eat it because they're coming up anyway, and they see, oh, there are a few that are starting to get, or a few adults out. So anyway, look at the rise forms. Pay attention to your drag. The other thing is, if the fish are feeding mouth first, and those flies are right on top of the water, take care of your flies. And when I say that, I mean dry them out, put good floating on them, stuff like that. You ready for me to tie
You're
it?
good? Yeah.
Okay.
Sight it in.
So I usually don't tie standing up, so bear with me. I'm gonna tie the full merger first, but I'm gonna try to do something wrong so Curtis freaks out. I don't even have any dubbing, so I'm gonna have to tie him Curtis noob style.
That's right.
So this is just a curved shank hook. You can use a Daiichi 1130. This is a Tiemco 2487. You can use a Tiemco 2488. Seems like everybody has their favorite curved shank hook. Okay. So I'm just going to do it in brown because I have brown thread, and the stupid easy magic dub that I found is brown. So the thing about this easy magic dub, it's almost like chenille, but kind of not. It's a weird material that only rookies use. No, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little tiny chunk of it. And if this were Curtis up here, he wouldn't do this step. He wouldn't burn it. But I want to create a nice little taper. So you can see it's got a blunt end there. That's like a torch. So I'm going to try to doctor this up. So it's a little bit more tapered. So don't tie those in super long. Keep in mind we're tying a midge here. And I'll just tie that in with the tail sticking up like that. And for this part, because I've got a down eye like that, if I bring my thread up to the eye, there's a chance that it's going to slip over the eye and unravel. So I'm going to take my hook, kind of prop it up in the vise. I probably should have done that first. So now I have less of a chance of my hook popping off there, or my thread popping off. So this is Evizote foam. Anyone ever played with Evizote foam? Yeah? So Evizote foam is a little bit different from normal craft foam. It's really spongy. It's a little bit more durable, has a little bit of sparkle to it. Let me see, sparkle. But it's a little bit thicker than what we want for this fly. So I'm going to basically cut a chunk into a square like that, and then I'm going to take a little bit more off of that, and let's see, so it's kind of like that. So I've just pared it down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of that, I'm going to tie it in just like that, okay? And for the back portion of this fly, I like to leave the back portion long because I can take my scissors and I can just come in here and pull it tight and then trim it, and then that back section just kind of sucks down into the rest of the fly. Now, if we were being fancy, we would put a little bit of dubbing around right there, but that's it. That's the foam
That is
merger.
the worst fly ever.
That's why I hate this. Oh, wait, no, I'm going to do something else that'll drive Curtis crazy. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the sharp edges.
Have you got a restraint on Curtis back there?
What?
You got a restraining belt or something on Curtis?
Do you know how much bigger I am than him? Just around here? Bring it. No, so that's the foam merger. Super easy fly. The good thing about this fly is you can tie a whole bunch of them in no time, and it works really, really well. It's hard to see. So if you're fishing any amount of ripply water, you're going to want to fish it behind something, or just kind of cast and get used to knowing where your cast lands so that you can watch for rise forms.
What do you think of a hot spot?
Hot spot? The fully mill version has a little hot spot, like little red gill, but
No.
I wouldn't do it, Phil. Don't do it, especially if it's purple. That's bull crap. Okay, so foam merger. What's the best way to pass this around? I'm going to attach it to this piece of foam.
Yeah.
What size hook is that?
That was an 18, just
so
for
that's-
demo purposes.
That's a big one.
So you can imagine the smaller you get with that, the harder it is to get that foam to pare down on itself.
Got a question
Yeah.
about rigging. When you're rigging two small dry flies like that together and fishing in tandem, do you guys typically fish it like one on a tag and one at the end, or do you tie more rubbers, tip it off the back of the hook shank?
You should tie a tag. I haven't done it. I used to fish a whole bunch just off the bend of the hook, and I find that I lose more fish that way if I get them to eat the front fly. So if you fish it on a tag, that front fly is independent. Again, with those little micro drag things, if it gets pushed, it's going to move a little bit easier. So I never fished tags. I didn't think they were that big of a deal until I started fishing midge tip lines, and it makes a huge difference. So what do you think, Curtis?
Barbless hooks have changed it too.
Yeah,
For it to stay on.
yeah, barbless hooks.
Plus, it's easier to swap.
Yeah, you can change the front fly without tying two knots.
Yeah, so you're basically, it's a dropper now. And you can also fish like a wash style line where the point fly could be the full merger. And then your first dropper could be just like a little zebra midge unweighted or yong or something like that, a little thread midge. And that one sinks. Whereas if you were doing shank to tip it, you can't do that. You don't have as much flexibility on what sinks, what floats, how tying them on and off. It's a lot more, it's a bigger pain in the butt too.
Funny story about that. We won't say what river or who it was, but there was a buddy of ours who went on a work trip and he got guided. And the guide had them rigged up. The top fly, the leader came down and he tied it to the bend of the hook. And he tied the bottom fly to the bend of the hook as well. It's because somebody told him that you got to tie the dropper to the bend of the hook. But he tied both to the bend of the hook. Anyway, we were giving our buddy a hard time though, because we're like, why didn't you tell him to change it out? That's pretty simple right there. Anyway, no bend of the hook. What, Stockton?
Is this fly able to break at all?
No, it is 100% bulletproof because Curtis doesn't tie flies that he'll have to retie. But it might fall apart after you catch 432 fish. Cool? All right, good question, Stockton. Okay, this is kind of a version of like a yong special or a zebra midge, but this is a fly called the milspec midge. Have you guys seen any of the milspec flies that we did? It's just kind of a play on words. It was hard to explain how this technique was or how to get the ribbing without just kind of giving it a name. So if you look at our our YouTube channel, there are a whole bunch of flies called milspec flies, and it's just a really simple method to get a simple barred body. When I first showed these to Curtis, I tricked him into thinking they were quill bodies.
That looks pretty slick.
Yeah, they were pretty nice. All right, so I've got another size 18 hook. This is, again, just, I think a 2487. And for this one, I'm using UTC thread in olive. The reason I'm using this is because it's nice and shiny and flat. So I'll just start my thread and dress the hook. And give it a little bit of a taper. And as you can see, the thread's starting to spin up just a little tiny bit. One of the reasons I like this bobbin is because it spins really simply, really easily. So I'm going to unwind it a little bit.
You should have been left-handed.
What's that?
Left-handed, it doesn't do that, it goes the other way.
I've seen you cast, Gayhart. I'm glad I'm right-handed. No, just kidding. I really haven't seen Rick cast, but it was a good joke.
It was a good guess. It's pretty funny.
All right, so now I'm going to go down to the back. You can see there's just a little bit of taper here. And I'm going to twist that back up just a tiny bit. I don't want it to be totally corded, but I don't want it to be too flat. Because if you tie dozens and dozens of these, you'll see what I'm saying. But instead of using wire or any other material for a rib on this fly, I'm just going to use a black Sharpie. I've used other types of markers, and the black Sharpie, or the Sharpie markers, actually are the ones that won't bleed. So what I'm going to do is I'll just take the thread, and I'm going to color about 2 inches worth of the thread. And now what I'll do with that, if I can see, the size 30 is going to be really interesting. And I'm just going to take that and rib it up the body. And you can see that the ribs lay down and they kind of fade a little bit. So that's about as simple as it gets for making a body. Now, you could do this with a bead, you could do this with a dubbing head, you could do this with whatever, but I'm just going to put a little bit of flash on it. This is like a fly that I would fish behind a griffith's gnat if I see the backs and the rise forms. So it's one that you'd fish in the film. This is just olive thread too. So this is, probably better tell you, this is just Vivus body quill that I'm putting on here. And I tie it in going over the eye. And then I'm just going to pull it back and then wrap my thread back over it. Kind of like that. Now I could make an olive head or a black head, and I'm going to do a two-tone midge, so I'll put a black head on it. So I'll just color up my string again. Flatten my thread out a little bit. Looks like I'll need a little bit more. And then just whip finish that. You could coat up that head with a little bit of UV resin or head cement or something like that. And then I'll just take this wing and cut it really short. So that's just a super sparse wing. Again, this is a pattern that's super easy. It's just thread and body quill. And you can tie up a whole bunch of these in about 100 different colors, maybe more, maybe 200.
Depends on how many markers you have.
Exactly. So, and you could, with olive thread, you could do a brown body or a brown rib. You could even use like an orange marker. You could use a purple marker. You could use any of that kind of stuff. And black is pretty pronounced. It will color it black. But a lot of the other colors that you can mess with will make some really cool kind of just faded olive colors. So just make a really faint rib on it. Anyway, that is the milspec midge pupa. We haven't done a video on this one.
It's killer.
Boom. You saw it here first. We got to do one. Where's that phone? Okay.
What
We get
Beavis did you use there? This part?
what color? BQ8. Whatever that one is. It's
B or B?
B. B as in boy. B as in bumblebees.
BQ.
BQ8. What's that?
Golden brown.
Golden brown.
Multi-colors.
Somebody's been on order patrol lately. Strong work, Big B. All right. So we're gonna tie a Griffith's gnat, and I couldn't find my size 18, so I'll just tie it on a size 20. This is a Tiemco 100. As you can see, it's got a little bit bigger eye, make it easier to thread. What's that, Big B?
101,
Oh yeah, 101. I said 100, right? It's a 101. I'm a rookie. All right, so this is a really easy fly as well. It's just got hackle and peacock. So I'm going to use brown thread on this because I have it, but the thread color doesn't really matter. You could actually use, say, red thread or orange thread or something like that to make a hot spot on the eye, but I'm just going to use brown. It's been a long time since I've tied one of these. And they're pretty hard, so. Okay, so I'm just going to dress the hook and then bring the thread back up close to the eye. And I'm going to take some peacock. So as you can see, I'm using the peacock eye. You see that? Really cool iridescent fibers. Because I'm using a small fly, I do want to use the feathers from the eye of the peacock because they're pretty fine. So I'm going to take 3 of them. I'm going to pull them all off, and I'm going to grab them by the tips, and I'm going to cut off about 1 inch. So now I've got a little tie-in point here, and I'll tie those peacock feathers in. You guys all just thought I did nothing but streamers, right? This is how I got my start in fly tying. It's tying size 11 billion midges for people. So that's why I kind of, my rebel story is I started tying streamers out of rebellion. Anyway, so I'm going to wrap that down the body. Now, is this one? Oh, this is a good example of why it's hard to buy saddle hackles without seeing them first or without having them sized. So this is a bronze grizzly saddle hackle. This is primo grade dry fly hackle. And the reason I got this one is because it's really, really small. There are some size 20s on this. And it's not labeled a midge saddle. This is just a regular saddle. We've got midge saddles here in the shop that have hackle that are bigger than this. So it's critical to have it sized. That's why we do flash hackle. But anyway, I think the biggest ones I've found on this hackle are 16s. So anyway, every once in a while you can find a gem like that. So I'm going to pick out a size 20. Let's see if I'm close. Ooh. You'd think that I've graded a hackle 3 or 4 times. Speaking of which, flash hackle's coming out Sunday, so you want flash hackle. So I'm peeling some off the stem. And when I tie this in, I want to leave a little bit of that stem exposed so that when I start to wrap it, I can make sure that the hackle's facing the right way. I'll wrap that forward. Take the peacock. I'll wrap those forward all at the same time. See what I did there? If you just grab it and break it, it's a really nice tying point. Now I don't want that to unravel because I'm doing a demo, so I'm just gonna throw a little whip finish in it now. Okay, now the way I tied this in, I probably should have explained it better, but you can see the shiny side of the hackle is facing you. So the dull side of the hackle is facing me, and there's a curvature to a hackle feather. So it's curving toward me. So the reason I do that is because when I take this, I'm going to kind of flex it out like this a little bit. And that's going to put a little tiny bend in that stem of the hackle. So when I start to wrap it, it's going to hinge from right there and it won't want to twist. Hopefully, I'm wrong. It does want to start wrapping the wrong way.
You're not using curves as hackle pliers.
Okay, I just broke my hackle off. I'm just going to wrap my thread through there. I'm going to re-tie it in. What I meant to say is that's a good way to reinforce your peacock right there. Okay, now.
Okay.
There's children present.
That's why I'm not saying some creative words. Okay.
Colorful metaphors, cheap.
Yeah. All right. So, doesn't look too terrible right now. Okay, now I'm gonna.
Hit it with some glue. Wait, I thought you were a pro at this, buddy.
There he is. Look how
Let's
fast
show
it's
that
going.
flag is boss.
So, you know what? I can usually overcome those. All right, let's see how fast I can do this.
Clark, I can teach you some French words you could use.
I already know one full other language full of swear words.
So good. You go.
Well, my dad could teach you some Portuguese.
Boom.
Well, what can you teach me, Stockton?
English.
Well, that's a start. Okay, let's see if I can. Oh, jeez. Rookie.
No pressure.
You up.
See, what I meant to say is I only tie streamers, so. I blame it on the standing up orientation.
My son just texted me and said that he's glad to see that he's not the only one who breaks hackle.
Listen up, Hilgus. Jeez. Okay. Body's there. I'm going to whip finish it. And now my hackle is wrapping in the correct orientation. But I just broke the hackle.
Dude, are you serious?
Watch this. Gayhart, you're killing me here. I just broke my hackle.
Clark, I can accept the blame.
All right, so check that out. Boom. See, I really have done this before. So you can also see that when I'm tying in and tying off materials, I'm not using a lot of thread wraps. What now, Curtis?
I'm just Instagramming this whole thing.
Listen up, Instagram followers. I don't have anything to say here. So, also, if you can see what I'm doing with my left hand, I'm grabbing the vise, I'm bracing the vise, I'm putting my finger around, and I'm bracing the scissors on my finger. You're gonna have to look up at me while I do that because it's all fingers here. But I just kind of brace it here when I come in and snip, because if I just come in like this, it's really hard to. Oh, there! I'll just do it with my thumb. That way you can see. Coming up with all kinds of good ideas right now. Okay. So there is the Griffith's gnat. So this is a 20. My go-to size with Griffith's gnats is probably an 18. And with Griffith's gnats, you can do all kinds of cool stuff with them. We have dyed peacock over there, so you can do them like brown with dun. What color? Purple doesn't work.
Ahora en castellano.
Ahora en castellano. Tenemos amigos en Argentina que nos están mirando.
Bastantes.
Okay, that means, what did I just say, Stockton? Yeah,
But you know,
we have a bunch of guys in Argentina that tune in, so that's kind of cool. Anyway, the Griffith's gnat. So I fished that one as kind of the visible fly. As you can see, that's a 20. It's a really small fly. You kind of have to train your eye for fishing small stuff in the wintertime. You can also tie these with a post coming right out the middle of them, just like a bright orange tuft. The reason why I don't like to do that as much is because when you cast out, that tuft can either lay on one side or the other, and then you have something that's bright orange on the water. So if you do a post, do something like white, something natural. That's another point. If you do fish two nymphs in like a really shallow nymph rig, fish a natural colored indicator. Like if you haven't seen the Pat Dorsey kit or the New Zealand wool kit, Pat Dorsey's is tan, New Zealand has white. So those are natural colors that exist in nature, so they won't spook fish. Where did that foam piece go? This is your job
I
now.
don't know.
Get
I
that,
will find it.
get that fly out of my face. Okay. Now that we've done the Griffith's gnat so effectively, any questions on any of that stuff so far? I'm just going to thread my bobbins. One trick to threading your bobbin is to cut a fresh section of thread
On an angle.
on an angle.
Yeah, on an angle.
I don't ever do it on an angle. But that's a good point when you're cutting your tippet. Threading 6X through small flies, if you bite it, it won't go through the eye of the hook because it creates a flat end. So you cut your tippet at an angle. I'll agree with that one. Okay, anyone want to borrow this bobbin afterward? It's got some cheech spit on it. Okay. Still have that piece of
Magical properties.
magical properties. The other cool thing about a saddle, especially if you're tying size 20s, even though I broke that piece of hackle in half because I'm a noob, I could get 6 flies out of just that little piece. So imagine how many flies this is going to tie. It's nice. And this is a bronze. It's not even super high grade. Okay, same hook.
20?
This is a 20 Tiemco 101. Oh, that's a terrible orientation. Are we straight?
Yep.
Okay. Fluorescent orange thread on this one. And yes, this part is critical. So I'm going to dress my hook. And I'll take that same piece of hackle. And I'll tie that in. Let me see if I can show this tie-in method a little better. So I'm going to take that, the shiny side of the hackle, that's facing you. So the dull side's facing me. And I'm just going to jam that stem in kind of at an angle like this. So when I tie that down, can't do it when I'm trying to explain it. when I tie that down, it will kind of push the dull side toward me and the shiny side toward you. So hopefully I can call my shot this time and it will wrap the correct way right from the get-go. So I'm just going to wrap my thread forward. That's the body. So I'm just going to wrap through that. And then tie that off. And then we'll whip finish that. 3 turns, plenty. Especially if you're gonna put a little bit of cement on it. Now that stupid fly has saved the day many a time. Fish it on the Green River, fish it on the Provo. I've tied them also and had good success with dun hackle, so orange and dun. The other thing is with the Griffith's gnat, you can tie a Griffith's gnat with dun hackle as well. So I don't know what it is about this one. I didn't know about it till I met Curtis about 15 years ago. So it's another noob status fly.
Still
Instagram's
filming.
Still rolling. Does anybody have any good troll comments so far?
I'll put some in.
Old Dad Shoe Barnes is on it. Hey, can you show Instagram Kelly Barnes' new K-Swiss?
That was already
They're
commented
funky
on.
fresh.
So I have a thing for dad shoes. I'm gonna start an app. It's called like Pokemon Go, but instead of finding Pokemons, you go find Nike Monarchs. So you go around and find dad shoes and take pictures. Everybody would hang out at Home Depot though, if that were the case. Okay. So I'm gonna show you 2 ways to tie the bunny midge. Has anybody heard of this fly before?
Never.
Bunny midge?
Sounds bad.
So, long time ago, this is probably 18 years ago when I first started fishing dry flies. A buddy and I ran into the same thing that a lot of anglers run into is rising fish that we couldn't catch. So we set out on a mission to tie the smallest midges we could. We ran into some size 32 TMCO 518s. Did anybody ever have packs of those? 518 is no longer made, but we were able to get our hands on some of those. And we found that it was pretty difficult to find materials where we could tie a fly that floated, was easy to see, and that was proportionate on a size 30 hook. So I hit the vise quite a bit. And I started tying with this. This is actually a jackrabbit foot from a rabbit that I shot last winter. So it's the same exact stuff as snowshoe hare, but snowshoe hare's foot, especially when they're harvested in the wintertime, they have a lot of anti-water properties. So they're trying to keep the rabbit dry. They repel water. There's a lot of crinkly fibers in there. They absorb. Floating really well. They're somewhat translucent, so it's a good dry fly material. Highly recommend that you play with some if you haven't yet. Okay. Can everybody see that hook?
And that's a size.
This is a size 26. So I'm going to do this version of the bunny midge on this one, and then I'll do another version of the bunny midge on the 30. Okay. This is the Gamakatsu C12BM. It is barbless midge. That's the name. That's what the.
It didn't stand for bunny midge.
Yeah, it does.
Or something else.
Yeah, or bowel. No,
No, don't go there.
So anyway, this hook has been awesome to fish with. Number one, it is barbless. So we talked about your hook set. When you cast out, you get a fish to come up. you're setting the hook about as fast as Curtis gets up to take the garbage out. Really slow. So having a barbless hook actually helps you penetrate the fish's mouth a little bit easier than if you have to drive a barb through their mouth, even if it's a tiny barb, okay? Plus it's a gamakatsu. Gamakatsu has a very good reputation for sharpness. And then look at the eye on this. It's got a huge eye. This is the same size eye as a size 18 hook. So for those of you who are older than me, Barnes, no, just saying.
Thanks.
Phil, you too. No, this hook's for you. Okay, so super easy fly. Lots of people talk about, well, I've got 16-aught thread, or I've got 14-aught thread, or I have whatever aught thread. The answer to those questions that we get sometimes is the aught system in thread companies doesn't translate across the board. The denier system does. So I'm tying this fly with 8-aught uni thread in camel, which is basically the same size as Beniki 12-aught, Gordon Griffiths 14-aught, Vivas 14-aught. The Vivas 16-aught is a little bit smaller than this, but not a ton. So yes, you can tie a fly down to size 30 with 8-aught thread, in case you get into an internet battle. So anyway, so I'm just going to start my thread here, and it's going to be really critical to manage thread wraps here. You don't want to use too many wraps or it'll bulk up your hook. I'm going to take that same section of Vivas body quill, and I'm just going to use the pinch wrap technique. As you can see, I've brought the thread up and pinching it between my fingers, and I'm just going to bring it straight down on the other side, and that catches the material. And then I'm going to pull those to length, and then I'm just going to wrap this down and then back up. That's my body and my tail. I used to put ribbing on these. Doesn't make a bit of difference. So midges don't have tails, right? So the reason this one has a tail that's a little bit flashy is that little shuck will kind of stay on that recently hatched midge for just a second. It's really translucent, and the fish will key on that. Okay? So now I need to make it float. The most popular material to make dry flies float is hackle. Finding hackle that's proportionate down to size 30 is pretty difficult, number one. Number two, it's really hard to tie with. So that's where we use the bunny. This one's a brand new one that I haven't used. I haven't ever gotten one of these ready. Okay, here we go. So it's all closed up right here. So you have to take the little toes and break them out. Don't do this while your wife's in the room. Okay, here's a funny story. When my wife was pregnant with our first daughter, she had to go into the emergency room. She thought she was in labor. My wife's super, super cool. So if you've ever met her, you know she's laid back, and she's like, we need to go in. You might be there for a while, so why don't you just bring your fly tying stuff? And I'm thinking, yeah, that's a great idea. So I'm sitting in a hospital room, and there are nurses going in and out, and I'm tying bunny midges for orders, and I'm doing this in the room. And the nurse goes like this. She looks in. She does that again, and then she walks right up to me. She's like, sir, is that a dog's foot? I'm like, yeah, I harvest them, you know.
I shot my dog. He was bad.
I sell dog's feet and three-legged dogs, so tell me what you want. Jeez. So I forgot about that story. I need to probably write about that one. So a few different parts of this foot that are really useful. Right here in the middle of the foot, right down in here, are really good fibers for smaller bunny midges, like this one in size 30s. As you get up toward the toes, they're a little bit stiffer and longer. So if you're going to do like blue winged olives of this style, you're going to use the toe fibers. Okay, so I'm going to dig some out of here. Then a little known fact is if you take a beard trimmer and you shave off the top of this foot, it's going to be the buggiest nymph dub that you'll fish. That's where we have snowshoe hare's foot dubbing. That's where they take it, from the top. So it's really good stuff. Anyway, so this foot's past the tularemia stage. I'm not going to dye. I harvested it in the west desert of Utah. So I'm going to take my scissors. I'm not going to open them very wide, and I'm just going to kind of jab them down in there where I have that fiber. I'm going to push them down and just snip off a chunk. Okay? Bunch of guard hairs in there. So I'm going to come in here and kind of clean off both sides a little bit. That's too much hair for this little bug. So I'll get rid of some of it. So essentially we've got some fibers that look like that. On the other side, it looks like that. Okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of a few more. I'm going to use that same pinch technique to put that right here in front of the eye. Two wraps, and I've got that right on top of the hook point, or the hook shank. Now I'm going to take the part that goes over the front of the hook, and I'm going to pull that toward me. And then I'm going to figure eight it. See that? Oh, that was bad. I'll try that again. I'll do it without trying to explain. Okay, so I figure eighted those wings in place, pull them tight, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap under those wings just one time, and all that does is it props those wings up at a little angle. So from here, I'm going to whip finish. This is a 26 again. And then I'm going to trim the wings so that they're roughly the same length as the body. So if I pull those straight up like that, I have to tilt it toward me so I can see it. And now we have no bulk on the body where we tied in the wing. We have a little buoyant puffball of a wing and super, super durable fly. So we tied this one up. We do them typically in brown, black, and olive. We went back to the river, and obviously the first editions weren't nearly as dialed in as this one. But we sat and caught fish until we got bored because we had the right size. Okay, so we're gonna do one last fly. What time is it?
8:22.
Nice.
Right on time. Got time for one more.
Okay, so
I'm
one more.
ending Instagram. So
You're
goodbye,
ending Instagram?
Say
Bye.
goodbye.
Instagram. All right. This is the smallest hook that we carry, a C12 BM size 30. It's a great, great hook. I think this is a brand new pack, so they like double bag them so they don't come out of the package. So I'm just going to cut the corner off of this bag and get one out of there. This is the most treacherous part of these. Okay, go back in there. Good Gamakatsus. Okay, Who has good eyesight in here? It's been like 2 years since I've tied an actual bunny midge, so that one was kind of a junk show. Speaking of which, you're up, partner. Okay. Also, this is a Renzetti Traveler. No midge jaw, nothing. This is a size 30 hook, and I've got plenty of gap, plenty of room to tie that fly. So, in my opinion, a vise should hold a wide range of hooks without having to change out the jaw. So this one will hold, like with a quarter of a turn, it'll hold a 4/0 streamer hook, no problem too. So good job, Renzetti. All right, so I'm going to build the body the same way. Uh-oh. I'm going to have to get my face right down by this.
You need my readers.
Heck no. Why don't you tell them the story about your readers on the river this year?
What story was that? Where I couldn't find them?
Where you couldn't tie on your fly, so you had to get readers the next trip.
I also couldn't tie, and it was a gradual thing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like tying. Then once I got readers, I was like, whoa, I can actually see my fly now.
You young kids.
Okay, so body of the midge is done. Okay, so has anybody played with this? EP trigger point fibers. So this is a synthetic fiber treated with some floaty properties that we don't know what it is, but it is awesome stuff. Really shiny, translucent, really fine, and floats really well. The coolest thing is they make it in a bunch of different hatch matching colors. So this one for midges that I use is called Quicksilver, obviously for the Quicksilver hatch that happens. Yep. So I'm just going to cut off a hank of this, and now I can tie 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 midges out of one hank of fiber. So to simplify this now, I don't have to dig in through that rabbit foot or anything, and I'm just going to do the pinch technique. 2 wraps, pull that toward me. You fish this one, Phil? Okay, so I've got that figure 8'd here, and I'm just going to do 1 wrap around the wings, and you can see how quickly you can tie this fly. Boom. That was a little bit sparser than the other one, so you can tie them in all different types of sparsities, but the most important thing here is that there's nothing on the bottom side of that wing to make the body disproportionate. Anyway, any questions on the midge tying stuffs? Go ahead.
What did you call your wing material or whatever that is?
It's called EP Trigger Point, and we have it in probably like 20 colors. Not that many, but some good ones. Like PMD, Blue Winged Olive, Rusty Spinner, that kind of stuff. Any other questions? If not, the shop is yours if you want to go look at stuff.